Hey Patreon supporters and channel members, and welcome to part 2 of the exclusive behind the scenes studio tour. Now, if you haven't seen part 1 already, I highly recommend you check that out first. You can find a link to it in the exclusives playlist below. Today, we're going to take a look at what's over there on the shelf to the right of me. And for each piece of equipment, we're going to see where it came from, whether it was a good deal on eBay or whether it was donated to the channel, and what condition it's in, whether it's been fixed or if it's still broken and needs to be serviced. As we go through each piece of equipment, keep in mind if there's anything you see that you want to have a video made about, you can let me know in the comments. I plan to get to everything eventually, but I'm happy to reprioritize based on the feedback I get from you guys. Right, before we get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how this channel came to be and my experiences with retro. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s through the 8-bit and 16-bit era and beyond, and I had access to a couple types of systems, mostly Apples and Commodores. I had my own 64 that I bought, and then I traded it for a 128, and then from there I traded that up for an IBM, a 386 SX25, I believe it was. So I do regret selling that 128, but I needed the money to buy the 386. And so about 4 years ago now, I bought this Commodore 128 over here on Craigslist locally for a good deal, and that's kind of what kicked off this whole return to retro computing in the first place. From there, it was all downhill, and having a global pandemic where I was working from home full time and kind of, in lockdown at home really didn't help things. The collecting sort of cascaded into what it is now at that point in time, and that's when I started the YouTube channel as more than anything an excuse to collect things and try out all of the different systems that I didn't have access to or didn't even know about growing up, and then to share those experiences with the rest of you. So that's really how this channel started and the whole point behind what it is that I'm doing here. So without further ado, let's get looking at some of those systems. All right, so let's start at the start, and what we have here on the top shelf is a very bendy piece of wood. Don't worry about that too much. There are metal supports underneath each shelf, and supposedly they can handle 200 pounds each. So I'm not too worried about that. What we've got here on the left is a little Lego model Ferrari. This is the F40. This is an older one of the Technic kits. It's just a little nod to the last 20 years I spent building and racing cars. Not Ferraris. This is a dream car, but much less expensive cars. But since I've done so much automotive stuff prior to the retro hobby, I figured just a little nod to that over here and a little color on the shelf. Next up, we have this lovely IBM PS1, which was donated to the channel by my cousin Eric. It was his family's computer growing up. And this is in great shape. You can see it's not even yellowed or anything. Fully functional, it works. This is a VGA monitor, and the monitor works. The computer works. It does need a new OS and some software to be loaded on here. The hard drive does work. It does not have a keyboard. I need to source a suitable keyboard. The PS1 keyboard isn't known for being super high quality though, so maybe a Model F or something like that. Yeah, I need to make an episode about this, and I hope to do that sooner than later. So IBM PS1. Now over here we have a stack of video equipment. A lot of this was featured on the Amiga fan subbing episode. This is the Laserdisc that I used to fan sub anime back in the day. This is a Super VHS deck that I purchased in order just to play back the tapes that I had made. This is not the one I was using to make source material back in the day. I had a deck that matched this. It was an editing deck. And this is just a regular VHS playback deck that I've had since the 90s. Up top is a Super Gen SX. This is a Genlock for the Amiga. This is a really high-end model that was fetching $400 to $500 used back in the 90s when I was doing fan subbing. I picked this one up on eBay for $20, though they regularly go for $200 or more. So I found this was a really great deal. Couldn't pass it up. So while this is not the model I used back in the day, I did think it was worthwhile to have this one as well. So there it is, Super Gen SX. And last but not least, we've got a little medium-sized Totoro here. Tonari no Totoro was one of the first things that we fan subtitled on Laserdisc, and so this is just a little nod to my history doing fan subbing back in the 90s and the Japanese animation that we worked on with the Amiga. Right, on the next tier down, we'll start with this. This is a Commodore 64C. The reason I bought this 64C was because The 64C was the first Commodore that I ever purchased. I was 11 years old. I took a job on the local farm at $4 an hour in order to buy a 64C. I think it was $125 brand new at that point, so not too expensive. Not really that many hours if you think about it, working on the farm to pay for it. So this is a PAL model. I imported this from the UK. I think I paid 70 British pounds for this, so was a little bit pricey, but not too bad. The reason I wanted a PAL model was because a lot of the demos and SID tunes are developed for PAL systems and they play too fast or don't play at all on NTSC models. So that's why I picked this one up. Next up is the Commodore Plus 4, and I picked this one up boxed complete for $110 US. This one is in excellent shape, as many of them are, because let's be honest, most of these systems didn't get a lot of use in their heyday. They may have been bought cheaply as gifts or on discount and really not used for anything much. The reason I bought this system is because I just finished reading Bill Hurd's most recent book, Back into the Storm, where he talks about the development of the TED machines, among others. And it was a fascinating story, and I immediately wanted to get my hands on one of those systems to try it out, to learn about it, and make a video chronicling what is unique about these things from a Commodore 64, for example, what make these special. And so I've got to make a video about this, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a pretty hefty history lesson as well. So I've been putting that off because there's so much content that's going to go into this video. But yeah, Commodore Plus 4 definitely has a lot of interesting history about the business decisions that were made and some of the technical specs of this machine as well. So yeah, pretty interesting. Now, this Commodore 64, you've seen this in just about every episode where I do feature the Commodore. This is an NTSC bread bin that was donated to the channel by Brian Casto. It had been sitting in his father's attic for many years, had a bad PLA, a bad RAM chip, and also a bad CIA. It was the first Commodore I ever repaired, so I did all the diagnosis and repair of this. And then later on, I did the Plasti Dip as an experiment. This is the removable plastic coating, the synthetic rubber coating. And then most recently, the keycaps. So this machine has been featured many times on the channel. It's sort of my workhorse Commodore 64, my do everything machine. And I use it for experiments as well. So thanks to Brian for donating this to the channel. This was basically the first donation that I ever got to the channel. And it's been a great system since then. So thanks again, Brian. Oh, and I mustn't forget to thank Dave Holdren for this Laserdisc player. He's the one who donated this to our anime fan subbing group back in the 90s. This was from his personal collection, and I've been using it ever since. So I forgot to thank Dave for this, but thank you, Dave, for the Laserdisc player. Okay, over here in this corner, we've got the 1750, the Commodore REU. This is for the Commodore 128, and it's a full 512K RAM expansion unit. I did a feature on demos that used the RAM expansion and the DMA controller in this. It can move data very quickly to the Commodore main memory at about a megabyte a second. So this is a pretty fascinating device. This was part of the Toronto estate. Nope, this was part of an estate sale lot that I bought on eBay. Had a variety of Commodore 128s and components and other accessories in it. I sold a lot of those parts, but I was able to keep this and keep a 1581 drive and a number of other things, and basically break even, get all my money back, and still retain a bunch of the parts after fixing up and selling all the other computer parts. And last but not least, we have the Wiko Command Control Joystick. This was donated to the channel by Bradford. I believe it was his dad's, again, an attic find. And it is in immaculate condition. The box is in great shape, but inside is all the original packaging. The joystick doesn't even look like it's been used all that much, so it's in really good shape. I will say that I don't particularly care for this style of joystick. It is nice, but it's not really great to use. The amount of torque that you generate using this long arm here requires you to really hold firm onto the base or to hold it down to the table you're using, so it really does tire your hand out very quickly using something like this, as opposed to, let's say, a more modern gamepad like a Genesis, gamepad or something like that. So Really neat little artifact, in great condition. Not my favorite joystick to use. There were so many different types of joysticks back in the day, and a lot of them just weren't very good, especially the pistol grips and things like that, that just generated so much torque that they just ripped themselves out of your hand or off the desk you were using them on. So Wiko Command and Control, neat piece of history, not my favorite joystick to use. All right, let's move real quickly through the first tier of the game shelf here. The first thing is that you can see they're bookended by a couple PC era games. These are just games from my collection. I'm not a big box software collector, but they do add a splash of color. Maybe I'll replace them with something more suitable from the 8 or 16-bit era as well. These are a bit later, later PC games from the 386 and possibly 486 era. So, right, moving along, we've got the Sega Mega Drive. This is the European model. This was imported from the UK. I paid £50 for it, and that was actually a really good deal for a number of reasons. One, it's in really great shape and it works perfectly. The other reason is it has the triple bypass RGB mod. It's got the region select modification. It had the power supply, and it came with a SCART cable. And I mean, a SCART cable alone is $20 if you were going to buy that separately. So just by pushing and holding the reset button, you can select the region. You can select the PAL region, NTSC region, or Japanese NTSC region. So it works with any game, and it has really crystal clear RGB output. The sacrifice you make with that triple bypass mod is that it no longer has composite out of any kind. It's only RGB. But it works great, and for the price of £50, it was a really good deal. Next up is the Sega Dreamcast. This system I've had since new. It's one of the few game consoles that I bought brand new, and it's in really great shape. It's been boxed most of its life. The one thing that's interesting about it is it's yellowed a little bit, but not too much sitting in the box. But check this out. Yeah, the door that covers the network and modem adapter port, there is a modem in there. Yep, there's a modem there. That's yellowed really strangely because this was never exposed to light. It just, I guess the plastic was different here. Or, maybe there was a heat source, but that's very interesting. Maybe the heat from the system itself caused that discoloration, but it's the only part of the system that's discolored is that little hatch there. So pretty funny there, but I've had this since it was new. All right, finally, we've got this Sony PlayStation, not PS1. I guess we got to call this the PSX now, but this was donated to the channel by Catherine, and it's in great cosmetic condition, and it works perfectly well. So I never owned one of these back in the day, but one of my friends did, and we played on it all the time. There's a number of games that I really enjoyed on this system. It's a classic system. I have yet to review it or do anything with this system, but it's in great shape. So thank you for the donation, Catherine. I'm looking forward to playing around with this more in the future. And while I've got this off, let's talk about 3D printers. One of the great things is for just about any one of these systems, you can find a model on Thingiverse where you can download a mount or a bracket to hold any one of these vintage machines. And this one I got specifically for the PlayStation, and it just goes in like that. It sits on it like that, and voila. All right, next we've got some more game systems here on the lower shelf. The first one I wanted to look at is the Amiga CD32. This is a recent acquisition. I just picked this up not too long ago from a seller in Scotland, I believe. I paid £235 for it, which is a lot, but it's actually a lot less than they're going for in America. This is a PAL model, which is actually good because a lot of the Amiga games are PAL games. This is basically a Amiga 1200 in a different form factor here. It's cost reduced and it's got the built-in CD player, but no floppy. So this is the only AGA Amiga I have, and I bought it specifically because I didn't have an AGA Amiga. The plan is to upgrade the system with a faster processor, an internal IDE CF card-based hard drive, give it a keyboard and RGB interface. Basically, all those things are available as an add-on card to this. We'll turn it into a full-fledged Amiga 1200 more or less, which is something that I want to do. This machine also needs to be recapped. It has the original capacitors, and it comes from that period in time when all those surface mount caps leak. So this is going to be a future project, something I'm looking forward to doing, and a pretty cool system, if not a successful gaming machine. All right, down here we've got an original front loader NES. I paid $30 for this system, and it included the power supply, video cables, games, and controllers. The only problem with it is it didn't work. It needed a new 72-pin connector, and even then, the spring that locks the tray into place is still missing. So it works, it's functional now that I've replaced the 72-pin connector, but it still needs a new pin to lock the cartridges into place. On top of that is the SNES that I recently picked up at the VCF swap meet. I paid $60 for this SNES, complete with games and a controller, so I thought that was a pretty good deal considering the prices for these just keep going up and up and up. The system works fine. It's got a little bit of cosmetic damage, a little bit of cracking plastic here, but otherwise it's in pretty good shape. And then this 3DS was featured in the video where I hacked the firmware and installed the Amiga emulator and the C64 emulator. So there's already been a whole episode about this. This is actually original. We bought this new back when it first came out. Over here, I've got a PS2 Slim and an Xbox 360. I picked up both of those systems at a yard sale last summer for $75 in total, complete with their controllers, power supplies, and 44 games. So I thought that was a really good deal there. The Sega Saturn was recently featured on the Buy E episode. I paid $30 for this Sega Saturn, which is like new and complete in box, plus shipping from Japan, which was quite a bit. But that was a really good deal, I thought, importing this system from Japan. And then we've got an original OG Xbox down here. This system is in good working order. I do have a mod chip in it. I've had this system since the early 2000s. It was an excellent, excellent media player. It was also excellent for emulators. It still is, actually. So this, I really want to do an episode about this original Xbox. It was an amazing system in its time for homebrew, and it still is pretty good for those purposes. I've replaced the capacitor for the clock capacitor, which is known to leak and damage these boards, so that's already been done. Otherwise, this thing is in great working condition, and I do want to make a video about that someday. And last but not least is the Nintendo Wii over here. I recently paid $25 for that with controllers and cables at the same VCF swap meet as earlier, and I thought that was a good deal. These systems are really at the bottom of the depreciation curve right now. So this generation of system is really the one that you want to be looking for the best deals right now before they start to get more expensive. And this one is the model that has the full GameCube backwards compatibility as well. Okay, we're nearing the end now. Down here, I just got a couple keyboards. This is an Apple extended keyboard 2 that came with the Apple IIgs that I bought. You can see it's yellowed and it's in need of some retro brighting, but this is a really nice keyboard. These are pretty comfortable to type on. They're very heavy, very beefy, but yeah, it's a pretty decent keyboard if you want to actually do some real typing on your Macintosh or Apple II that has an ADB bus. Next to that, I have this thrift store find. This is a DOS keyboard. This was a $100 plus keyboard back in the day. I got it for $5 at Goodwill. It's got Cherry MX blue clicky switches on it. So a good find for $5, I think. Next to that is the Sony PVM 1342Q. And I've talked about this in the past. This was a eBay find that was really inexpensive, and I purchased it and the seller shipped it, and it arrived completely unprotected in its box with a big dent in the side, and it didn't work. It was completely DOA. When I opened it up, I found that there were over a dozen cracked traces in the main board. It had been completely brutalized in shipping, and the system didn't work at all. It wouldn't get any high voltage. Once I fixed the high voltage, it wasn't getting any signal. Once I fixed dozens of traces, it took 50 to 70 hours to fix this monitor, not really knowing what I was doing without having access to like some of the tools that I needed. So it does work really well, and it's beautiful now. The nice thing about this one is it came from a very small outfit that was doing some video work, so it didn't look like it was used. It wasn't powered on all the time. It looks like it's a very low hour tube. The image is really great. It doesn't even need to be recapped. It's really excellent now that it's been fixed. So I'm really happy with this monitor. And of course, I got all my money back on it because it was completely DOA due to shipping. So a good deal there, probably not worth the time invested in fixing it, but I'm really happy that I was able to. Over here, we have the Sears Total Video System, which I recently did an entire episode on. This monitor probably still needs to be recapped in order to bring it back to life, and the tube is a little bit tired. We've seen that the image is a little bit faded. There's no burn-in on it or anything like that, but it was clearly used as a television as well as a computer monitor during its service lifetime. So it's a little bit tired. But otherwise, for $100 locally on Craigslist, it was a good pickup, I think. And that brings us to the very end of the lower shelf. Down here, I've got a boxed TI-99 4A tape recorder, which is in great shape, and it matches the beige TI that I have on my desk. And the beige TI is the one that my family had as our very first home computer. So this is part of that set. This isn't the original one we had, but I picked that up for $20 on eBay in good working condition. And it's featured in the Tunnels of Doom retrospective. And that's the only time that I've ever shown that on the channel. Other than that, I've got some tapes. I do like to acquire brand new media, and I found this at the Ham Fest, and it was a sealed pack of brand new tapes. I dropped the pack of tapes and it broke the outer seal. So it's still a sealed pack of tapes, but the outer seal is broken now, which is a bummer because it was really nice before I did that. But collecting unopened period correct media is kind of a fun thing to do, and I grab those wherever I can. I think I paid $1 or $2 for that pack of tapes. So there it is. All right, I think that's it for part 2 of the studio tour. If you saw anything over there on shelf 1 that you want to have a video made about, please let me know in the comments. Like I said, I'll get to it all eventually, but I'm happy to reprioritize based on your feedback. And speaking of feedback, if you have any questions or suggestions, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you, so don't be shy. In part 3 of the studio tour, we'll be taking a look at the desk behind me and how it's been built to hold 6 vintage computers and how they're all wired together. Other than that, all that's left is to say thank you guys so much for your continued support. It really does mean a lot to me. I hope you're enjoying this type of exclusive content, and we'll see you next time.